Okay, before the break, we finished the rest of the stuff that I had on the list. Quickly go over about colors. Gradients make a big difference. The last one is more accentuated than I normally do it, but the way it was before going back and making adjustments, so it clearly showed on the screen. But very, very subtle differences where people won't even notice it, where it does still look like one color. Well, they'll notice it, but not consciously. They'll subconsciously notice that that color looks better. But there's other things we can do. I guess this next element would be a good place to look at the next thing. Or I'll go to the one at the bottom, this one. I'll put an ID on it this time. ID elevated. That'll work. So unlike class names, we can't have multiple class names. And before we go start using that in CSS, I'm going to look at some things over here in the inspector. This one. Reload the page. Notice how that name shows over on still viewing the page. We still get the tag name, and then we have the ID. Or if I go up to one of those to add a class, yeah, the nav, add two classes, so we get tag name dot class name, which should look at least a little familiar to some of y'all who've had other programming classes. See those dots everywhere. Again, I'll just subtly mention it, but not a coincidence that we use the same term and the same notation. So it's not a pointer. If anybody's had C++. Nobody else really uses C++. There's some pointers built into Python, but we don't adjust them. We only use the ones he built in 1989. They put there in Christmas break 1989, and he stopped doing that after a couple weeks into the project even, so there's not very many. We've had pointers, they're not pointers. We have a dot, not an arrow or an asterisk. The same thing here. Tag name dot that class name. I guess to take this a little further, I could also add a class here. Instead of that blue one, let's add the subtle class to that so that it's that same blue as the one above. So I have an ID and a class name on it now, just to show how those show up on there. So tag name, ID, because that's unique, then dot all of the class names. We also have a name attribute. I'll go ahead and throw that in there, show where name is random name. Can't think of anything quick enough. Not going to use the name attribute today, so just to have a random word there while I'm pointing at things here. Because that one does not show up there. So ID and class are very, very connected. Usually ID and class are the ones we use on the client side, and the name's the one we use on the server side. Pretty much, the server is set up for the name attribute, and we have to do a whole bunch of work to make it use anything else. So it's very, very unlikely that you will ever use one of the other ones because it's a lot of work to make it use one of the other ones. It's very unlikely that you'll ever use that on a server. But a common way to attribute it and things that are going to go to the server, like input boxes, the actual use of these color inputs, not the little sample coloring that I recommend doing. That way you have it right in place. It's an input in a form, so that would be sent to a server for processing and storing in a file somewhere. But we can have multiple ways to identify it. Lots of class names. IDs should be unique A computer does not know how to count to one. So we can give 1,000 different things the same ID and the computer is still gonna think it's unique. I sometimes use that to take advantage of stuff that, mostly on client-side scripts. I'll sometimes take advantage of that because it's easier to work with IDs than classes in the server-side script or client-side script. So I'll just give a whole bunch of things the same ID and the computer doesn't know how to count to one, so it'll do the same thing for all of them. But at least for organization, your mental organization as you build stuff, ID should be unique. And class is a category, the categorization of it, and everything falls into multiple categories. Okay. Saw a comment that made me laugh the other day, talking about categorizing people. And like if you start putting labels and differences on there, where do you stop? It's not hard to make the argument that there's 8 billion types of people on Earth. Down at the ID level, all unique individuals. But that's a different point. So back to our thing. From the name there, the next big issue, I guess I could point the camera back at the wall again. I'm not sure which some, make sure the video is showing. Okay, I can point the camera back at the wall again. This button. Point the remote at the camera, not the wall I'm going to point it at. So back to that point of the not subtle colors. Or if I zoom down, we can see it a little bit more. We also don't look at colors at the same level. If that color looks very different down there kind of under the desk than it does up near the top where there's nothing between it and the light bulb. Big difference there. Or the same thing up in the corner where it's too high for the light bulb to hit directly. There's depth to it. I'm going to on the road and get these back out of the way. And we can add in that some depth by including shadows. There are two types of shadows, box shadows and text shadows. Lots and lots of people, most of your reference material will complain about text shadows, if anything. There's really only one situation where I like to use those. We'll see that here in just a second. Actually, I'm going to take this class name out. I just wanted to point at how we can have both of them. And you see there's ID and a class. But I'll take it out in a minute so we'll get back to the dark colors. That will relate to them. Add some white space. I don't like typing at the bottom of a screen. I don't have a good reason for it, except I just don't like typing at the bottom of the screen. It seems odd to me. So we have that ID, and to refer to the ID over here, we use the pound sign. So pound elevated. And well, it's a box shadow. Here, type the other one first. I was going to type box shadow and shadow box to see if any of you all knew which one it was. It's the first one. It was on the predictor text list. I should have typed the wrong one first. But a box shadow, and then this takes in several attributes. We can do them all in separate things. So there's horizontal and vertical, blur radius. So we can do box shadow dash left, box shadow dash below, blur, box shadow dash blur, then the color, and but we need several numbers to make a shadow. So how far over and down does it go? So let's say 12 pixels over. And this is something I like to do, especially at first, or EM, that's gonna be huge. Shouldn't have said over. Maybe you can't remember which number goes first. Is it left and right first or up and down first? We'll just use an extreme example and then it's easy to check. Which way does positive go and which way does negative go? Little things like that. Just use an extreme example, confirm which one's which, then change it back to the reasonable numbers. The blur radius is how far it takes that to fade out completely. So I'm gonna do a lot here. I'll say 36 pixels. I'm gonna back that off a lot after the extreme version. But that's how far it takes to fade out completely. So usually that number works best if it's smaller than the first two numbers, or just a little bit bigger than the first two numbers. So maybe you go 9 over, 9 down, and you would completely fade out at 12 pixels. So the shadow's almost faded out. Or you go 9 over, 9 down, and the shadow fades out at 4 pixels. So that you get that sharp edge of it. That's where, how far until it completely fades out. Then we can add the word inset or outset. I'm going to leave that off for now. I'll come back to it. And then we need a color for it. And any of our colors will work. This is a shadow, so I'm going to put something dark. All zeros is black. All Fs is white. So that's like every switch is turned on is 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. I think I said the right number of ones there, or all of them all. And if all three, red, green, and blue, have equal amounts, it's grayscale. So if we say 3A, 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 that'll be a gray. And it's definitely closer to all zeros than closer to all F, right? Has everybody seen hexadecimal? How to calculate what that is? So we have 3/16 plus 10, so 58. I'm seeing confused looks here. So let's review that real quick. So you kind of know what number it is, so you can go to like the RGB colors. So our numbering system, we're used to 10 because we have 10 fingers. That's a good number for humans. Machines use 2, 0 and 1. Way too small of a number for humans to use. So we need a good number to use, something closer to 10, but it has to be built entirely of 2s. 2 squared is 4. That's still kind of small for a human. If we take 2 squared squared, it gets 16. It's more than our fingers, but less than our fingers and toes. So still an easy number for humans to work with. 2 squared 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 would be 256. That's way too much for us. Actually, it's not. But if you tell a human to work with 256 symbols, they're going to panic. Even though we probably do. Right? Look at how many emojis are on your phone. Capital letters, lowercase letters, all the other symbols we use. We regularly use more than that, but the number's big enough that a human's going to panic if you tell them to work with that many symbols. So 16 is a really good base for humans to work with and translates directly to machine language. So then just like our base 10 numbers, right? Say 23 means we have 2 10s and 3 1s. Or 423 means we have 4 hundreds, 2 10s, and 3 1s, which are all powers of 10. Any number raised to 0 powers of 1. So we always have that column. 10 to the first power, 10 squared. So we have 4 10 squareds. 2 10 to the first power, 3 10 to the 0 power. That's how our base works. You probably haven't seen it since elementary school. Maybe 4th or 5th grade, right before you start using X's and Y's. So, but not something we normally think about. Nothing special about 10. We can use any number we want. And I just showed that 16 is a really good number to use for both humans and machines. So we have 2 digits that, if I put some parentheses here, we're related to 4. We have 2 sets of 4. So we have 4 bits, 4 bits in each hexadecimal digit, but we're basing our numbers off 16 instead of 10. So that one I just wrote, 3A You need 16 symbols. 0 through 9, they're numbers, so obviously we're going to use 0 through 9 first. Then when we hit 10, we need a single symbol, not two symbols to represent 10. So the most logical ones are alphabet. And you can do that on your finger still. So 10 is an A, and it's counting your fingers A, B, C, D, E, F. And 15 is F. And so what this number really is we have 3 16s, or 3 things in the 16 column, plus 10 things in the 1 column. So 48 plus 10 would be 58. Not that you necessarily need to do a lot of calculations, but everybody's going down a different pathway. Some people will do that every single day. Actually have to calculate what the numbers are, or in binary section, I'll talk about it that way. Some people are on their IT pathway is in a place where they're going to see binary every single day. And other people may never see it again after a class lecture. And so kind of have to cover it, but just a reminder, hopefully you've seen that before. If you haven't, let me know, and I can work up a more thorough review of what all's in there. But that's 58, 58, 58 on a scale of 0 to 255. So much closer to black. So a nice dark one. And remember to save the file. And then from that test, we can see that over on the right, it's really, really small. And on the bottom, it's really, really big. So back here, adjusting that something better. Also, let's put a width in there, width of 48%. That way we see it on both sides. There we go. So we can easily tell which side's the 4 EM and which side's the 12 pixels. Remember, EM is the one, that's the measurement that was invented with the Gutenberg printing press. The size of the little blocks that would go in that printing press. It's really nice because then all of your sizes are based off the data you're presenting. Your sizes are all based off the words on that page. And it's a great way to get consistency across different sizes of pages, or screens in our case. So we don't need that extreme one, so I'll do 12 pixels, and 12 pixels, shadows are usually measured in pixels, and I'll do a couple of these. So 6 pixels for the blur radius. So shadow usually looks more like that. See, we have that nice crisp edge. Our shadow goes further than the cutoff. If I change that to like 16, now our cutoff is further than the shadow, so it's going to fade out completely. Those are the 3 numbers that are important, and then the color. Now I'll do those other words. Offset. Did I spell that wrong? Where does it go at the end? I might have put it in the wrong place. Save the file and then I load it. There we go. Well, inset is definitely showing. I don't know why outset was just being ignored. I'll pull it up and see if it pops up on the page of text. But notice where the inset shadow is. It's over, kind of like it's inside of there. Did I remember the word incorrectly? I was thinking inset and outset, but outset is the default value, so that's the one that doesn't get typed. Usually it's one or the other, and inset is the one that, if we want to add it in there, I guess it doesn't remember the word. Okay, well, at least Google Chrome stopped accepting the word. Used to be able to type it and it was the default value, so it didn't change anything. I noticed something else. It stopped accepting the default word. But outset is those directions. Inset is inside on the other side of it. Where do you think negative numbers go? I make it negative 12. Negative 12. Everyone take a guess? Who's ready to check? I see some views. Look. So negative numbers do the inset down there. So it's still on the same corner of the box, but we move from the outside to the inside. If I add inset back in, oh wait, inset is still there. Let me take out the word inset. There we go. That's probably what a lot of y'all were expecting. I guess it was a 50-50 choice. There wasn't a lot of options there. But sometimes it's best to try things. And notice how we get that. It looks like there's some depth to the page now. Those others are there. But that other one looks like something actually sitting above it. That can make a big difference. What am I in nav tags? Where did I put? Oh, big words. I'm going to make that big words class now. Big words. Again, play around with those things. Try some different values. See what you see. Excuse me. I guess one more tip before we move on from shadows is I found it can be a lot better. I'm gonna switch that to an RGB color. We saw that the other day. Same values in the same order. We just can use decimal numbers. With shadows, it's not going to matter on the white one here, but I found it can be a lot better. I'm going to take one of those negatives off. To use RGBA to 0.8 and give it some transparency. So remember our alpha value, red, green, blue, alpha. We don't have an alpha on the keyboards, we use the A. Alpha is the measure of opaqueness. 100% is fully opaque, 0% is fully transparent. And shadows are not opaque, right? We can see right through a shadow. So that's definitely a good spot to use an alpha value or some sort of transparency. Can't really see a difference on the white because it's just white behind it. We don't see any difference, but if there was another color behind it, it would look a little bit better instead of just completely throwing that color on there. But play around with it, see what you like, see the effect that different ones have, because that's what you're really looking for is that effect. Big words is going to be a font size. Let's make something big, 4 EM. Okay, so some nice big ones. So we also have text shadows. And I'm going to go over here and remove the subtle and change this to the big words. So we have two things with those big words. Hope that's not the one I missed. Subtle there and big words here. Okay. So first off, notice which color it went back to. You remember where we defined that color at? Because the stuff today have an ID and a class, and we're not really using name. I'll take that off there. I just wanted to point at something with that. So we have both an ID and a class, but neither one of those has a color in it. The side tag has a color, so we get all those rules. We're getting to the point now, probably the next chapter or two, you'll start hitting the point where you might end up overwriting some things if you're not careful, or when you get into your final project. The properties will go in the order that they are here. It's not really an override. An override would be a replacement. So like up here, we say this is beige. If we have another nav tag later that says nav tags need to be red, it makes it beige, and then a couple nanoseconds later, it makes it red. So as far as the human looking at the page is concerned, it looks like an override, but it really does run both rules. It just runs one and then the other. So as you move down the page, you can override things from above. But we're pulling the color from way up here somewhere. I think this one of those colors we put on the other day. I just wanted the darker background because on those big words, along with box shadows, we also have text shadows. And same thing, we can do it all in a bunch of separate lines. The appendix in the back of the book, look at box shadow, you'll see box shadow dash, a whole bunch of things, or just as one line. We'll see that in a lot of places where things can apply more than one place. We can either do each property individually or all of them at once. Text shadow has sort of the same numbers. The text is smaller, so I'll do say, oops, not 3 EM, 3 pixels, 4 pixels, 5 pixels, and some sort of color. Keep it on the outset. I'll do right in the middle gray, so like A9, A9, A9. Pretty much right in the middle. Where are we? 256 colors, and we go 0 to 255. So it seems like we're right off, but if we back up one, we're one before the very middle here. I didn't want to do the full calculation again. I already talked about calculations. A lot of times with style sheets, we can predict all of this, but in the time it takes to actually sit down and calculate the prediction as how the things interact with each other, you could run 15 trial runs before even the simplest of predictions from the full cascading style sheets is there's interaction. So most people just go with the trial, take a starting guess and make little changes to find the exact value you want. Question popped up in the chat room, how we remember all this by doing it repeatedly. You'll see it over and over and over again. Practice is good. Several people's table of contents. I meant to make a comment earlier. I suggested putting a table of contents there on the domain host. That's a great place to get different practice every week. Just go in and style that differently every week. Several people have done that already, and I kind of had a good little laugh about how much better the table of contents looked than the actual homework it was linking to. Everybody that did that clearly spent a whole lot more time on that table of contents than they did on the homework. It made me laugh, especially on the first homework assignment, which is just kind of introducing things. But there's a lot of trial and error. Take a guess for a starting point, and then adjust from that. See what it looks like and adjust from that guess. So I put this on here and notice it made it look awful blurry. Out here, we don't see much here. It's very exaggerated there. But notice we didn't see that in the one above. The one above has a light background, light text, light background, and a medium shadow, and we don't see it. But light text and medium background and a dark background, and it makes it blurry. And that's actually something that I look for. So if I change that text to go in there and change that text color, let's make the text itself white. Okay, so the most extreme example, a dark background and a white thing. Doesn't look as blurry. Those were almost a match of colors. That's why they were really close. So it blurred out the edge, but sometimes that is what I look for. So it doesn't, it's like it didn't hardly do anything here. If you look really closely, you'll see something. I zoom way in on the page. We can tell it's there. Just barely, right? There is a shadow on those letters. It shows up a lot better on my screen than TV here. But we can tell there's a shadow there. It doesn't seem to be doing much of anything. It doesn't make it definitely doesn't make the thing stand out the way the shadow element is down here. Which is like that end of file thing. It's not scrolling far enough. So I'm going to add the break tag in. And like I suggested the other day, remember one of the buttons you want to look for in your text editor is the keyboard shortcut. Copy and paste an entire line. You don't have to highlight it or anything. If your cursor is anywhere in that line, it will make it a duplicate of that line. There we go. Now I can scroll past and see the shadow. So on the element, it really made it pop out. It didn't do the same on the text. I like it for a different reason. So let me turn it off again while we're looking at this one. Home and N keys are useful for highlighting something. So if you push N, hold Shift and hit Home to highlight that, and pretty much all text editors Control/ is your comment. Highlight a line and hit Control/, and that'll comment out that line. Not always. Some of them are different, but that's in most of them. That's the way to comment an entire line at once. Look how sharp that is. And there's very, very precise, sharp edges. And it's kind of like what I was talking about earlier with the gradients. That's almost unnatural. That's where I use text shadows for. A lot of your reference material is going to recommend against it because you get something like this. And by the time you can only make it see, then it starts to get hard to read. Unless you have a huge font. That's why I made this so big. If I throw the box shadow on that one with the little font right above it, or where's one that we just there? And that one. Let me grab that box shadow or text shadow and put that up here. And I think it was in the article. Did I save that? Well, I don't even see it. Let me make that not in the middle. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Almost a black shadow. There we go. It starts to make it really hard to read. I guess even on the TV here in the room, it's still really, it's a great big TV. It's a 70-inch TV, so it's still kind of big, but if the text is small, the shadows make it hard to read quickly. So it'll start to, a lot of reference material will say to kind of advise against it. My recommendations, like what I was saying about the gradients here. Remember, that was accentuated, so more subtle than that gradient was. Something people aren't going to notice consciously. Subconsciously, they'll notice it's not a flat color, but they won't pay any attention to it. It'll just suddenly look better to them in the back of their mind. Same thing on letters. These look almost look unnatural. They're so sharp there. So I like to use text shadows for that reason. And it only goes one direction as well. Light shadow here. B3, B3, B3. That's a little bit on the lighter side. Light text on a dark background. I like to add in a very subtle shadow to blur those edges. It just seems so unnatural to me. That might not be the right word, but having it that sharp and crisp isn't something we see in the natural world. Things are more subtle down. You think of it like watering that erosion on those layers. A little bit of wear and tear, so they seem more natural. That doesn't work the other way. Dark text on the light background, it will not have that effect. It makes it hard to read. If you have light text on a dark background, a very subtle text shadow. I think makes it easier on the eyes by blurring up those crisp edges. And again, you'll want to play around with those. Same thing with the last one that were for the visual cues. I'll go back to the elevated one and put it here. We also have a border radius. This one you're probably going to want to look up occasionally. Border radius CSS, because it was originally written in French. So when we spell out the words fully and put dashes between them, it seems like the wrong order in English. So this is one you're probably going to forget a few times. CSS border radius property. In particular, when we get to a specific corner. If it's just border dash radius, that's fine. Oh, they actually put IDs on all of theirs. Yeah. Border top left radius, top right. That always throws me off because I want to put radius first. So I would say border radius, top left. But in French, it goes the original being developed in French. It's a different order than, well, at least I would do. I guess it's not grammatically incorrect to say it that way, but it seems like the wrong order for adjectives. So we say like a border, top right radius, and then give it some sort of percentage. And again, when you're typing things, give some numbers some try. So 25%, print it off quite a bit. And notice how it's uneven. So it's 25% down this side, and then 25% down this side, which that's not a square, so those are different amounts. Those are different lengths. 50%. Again, it goes halfway down that side. If I put it 50% on the bottom, so in Sublime, I'll hit Control Shift, duplicate. Whoops, not that much. Bottom right radius. The 50%, we get a nice little curve on it. 17%, 17%, that way they don't line up quite so much. So if you have a square and do 50% on every single corner, which if you just say border radius, it applies to all four corners. If you want just one or the other, a specific one, they'll do that. You can see there on the bottom, the shadow went with the radius. So start getting some curved edges. It takes in a percent number. I'll leave that one. I'll leave like the radial thing. I'll leave that for you all to mess around with. It's really easy to try some percents and see what does what. Those things can add quite a bit of flair to our page, right? One last thing I want to talk about real quick, which I think the book has probably already shown. Looks like I didn't use black anywhere, so I'll switch my pen to black here. Up here, those words start right at the edge. No extra space or anything. It's right at the top of the page. This one starts pretty close afterwards. Looks like there's some default things. And a little bit of space there, that's built into the paragraph tag. Just a little bit of space around it. There's not really much spacing here, right? Everything's in the top left corner of the box. I put it in that element. And everything, well, if I had some more paragraphs in, Don't need to go change anything. You know, if I added a bunch of stuff, they wouldn't be spaced out. We have a little bit of space from the paragraphs. So there is something called the box model. Or if I go to the inspector, when I hover over one of these elements, notice it only highlights that element here, nothing extra. So, when I hover over like the whole page body, there's some other colors showing up there as well. Little bits around, or there's this little picture down here. I mean, it shows the color coding. Anything blue, which is all we get here right now. All we have is when it highlights it in blue. And then green. I guess a couple of I don't know the names of those colors, whatever those two outside colors are. Some brownish, light brownish thing, but they're definitely different. They all mean something different. And that is what's known as the box model. And you can see from the picture here, right, where everything fits in. I'll draw it on the board anyway. There be enough colors. So right in the middle, really with no extra space on it, is the content itself. The text or the image. That's what made hypertext transferring text and images, text and graphics. And around that, we have padding. And after that, since it's maybe not very clear on the thing, I'll try to draw it real close here. There's a border, and we have control over how wide that border is. It could be 0 pixel wide border, 1 pixel, 5 pixels, 50 pixels. We have control over that. And then outside of it, those are all things we will see. So if we made some with a blue background, that's the padding. Our content is only the text. And then surrounding that is padding. So when we say background color blue, the padding and content are what gets background color. Everything inside of the border is not included in that. And then outside of that, we have a margin going to the next, over to the next element. And as nice as it would be, these are not standard. So you'll go on CSS, it's always that way, HTML and CSS. But you'll go somewhere else in programming and find that they say the stuff inside is the margin and stuff outside the border is the padding. So different programmers pick different names for it. For us in HTML, the padding's inside and the margin's outside. And then we get the other element over here. So the margin's the way over to the space to the other element. Then we have some padding. And I have another color. Another color. And then the content in the other one. So that's what's referred to as the box model. It's a border included. It has already shown up in your homework. The textbook took steps on how to deal with that question, whether the border is included or not. If we say our element is going to be 15 pixels wide, that's kind of small, but 15 pixels wide, is the border included in that 15 pixels? No. That's correct. By default, it is not. The border, our padding and content will get that. First off, our content gets that, so we might run out of padding. Tries to give it to the content, it'll cut things off, but the border's not included. And that's what that line that the textbook had you put at the very beginning of your CSS file was. And we use the asterisk, a wildcard selector, just like from databases or search engines, to fill in the blank. Anytime we type asterisk, that means we're leaving the computer to fill in whatever letters it can fit there, any number of letters. If I have a question mark, it can only fill in one letter. If we type an asterisk, it can fill in any number of letters. The wildcard selector, so it basically fills in all of our selectors, all of our stuff. And first line in the CSS file from your homework, use that wildcard selector. So select everything. Instead, box model, all. I don't ever use it. I can't ever remember what it is unless I'm looking at it. But it's in the textbook had you do something at the beginning about the box model. I'd have to look up what the property is called again. So I guess answers your question, Alonso. Earlier you asked about memorizing all this stuff. I've been doing this for years. I made lots of web pages. I can't remember all of them. I remember the things that I use all the time. But like that box model on the textbook uses to include the border in those dimensions. Because I don't do that. Border sounds like outside to me, like a fence. It goes around something. A fence goes around a yard. It's not part of the yard. That's the way my mind thinks about it. But the author of our textbook thought the other way. So I never use that one. Every spring when I teach this class, every January or right around the 1st of February, end of January, it's the same spot every time I'm the best of the class. I talk about it and I have to look it up if I need it because I don't ever use that one. That's the way the textbook does it, is opposite of my mind. The way my mind works or thinks about it, but that's in your textbook, so you know that property. But probably not going to memorize all of them. You're going to memorize the ones you do use a lot, the consistent ones, the ones that develop into your own style. And then other ones you're going to go look up. So we can use that to space these things out. Borders are especially useful in development. So the one thing I almost always do, well, you can see from the particular text there, border top right. Oh, actually the ones at the bottom, border block, border bottom, border collapse, border color. We have a whole bunch of properties about a border, or we can do them all at once. So for a border, there's 3 numbers we need and more we can add in. It's in the appendix in the textbook. You can try different things, see which one you like. The 3 things we need are how big is it? So let's say 2 pixels. What style is the border? I'm going to do dotted. There's several styles. Again, they're in the appendix in the book, or you can quickly find out. Border style CSS, and see all the different styles: dash, group, inset, outset. I'm going to type outset on one down in a moment, but something I often do is something like this in red. And I don't do this because I want a red border on that, a dotted red border around that. I do is I come through and paste that into every single element. Trying to push the paste button. Okay, it disappeared from my clipboard for some reason. Copy that and paste it here, and that's probably good. I'll put it on every single element so that I can tell where things are. Because usually we don't have different colors for the background. Sometimes I'll do that with color. First thing I do is do background colors, which will make more sense next week when we get into like columns and layouts that change. We're going to go from a tabular layout to a column layout, depending on screen size, whichever one might look better on a desktop, and the other one looks better on a phone. So I'll put the borders there for that. So then it can easily be turned on and off and just click anywhere in that. Oh, I don't need that one. So click anywhere in the line and hit in and hold shift and home, and control slash will comment that off. And then that's something that's in every single one, so that there's this line I can turn on and off depending on whether or not I want that border to show. Because right now everything just goes all the way across. That's the first thing we're going to look at next week. One of the first things we're going to look at next week is to adjust that. I guess there's one thing that doesn't go all the way across, just because I wanted to see that right corner. So that one's useful. Otherwise, you throw in borders to make things look nice. So like a border, and check the list. You're not expected to memorize the list. Look at a few of them. The two I'm going to talk about here in just a second because they relate to the shadows. Border, maybe 4 pixels through in yellow. We get that nice little border around that one. And this one that has shadows, way down here, I think. Oh yeah. Border, let's say 8 pixels, outset, and green. We already talked about colors. I'll just throw a word in there. Notice where the dark and light side goes there compared to that shadow. Let me change it back to just all positive numbers. So our default shadow, there's no word here, so that's an outset shadow. An outset border, the dark part of that border goes with the outset shadow. Same thing with inset. I change that to inset, and then add the word inset up here. You see the dark part changed, so then it's like it enhances that overhang appearance, and adds to that 3-dimensional quality. So those words do go together. Lots of different borders. Y'all can read through a list, look up the different lists. There is a short list. Some of y'all may have seen most of them from other GUI packages: ridge, groove, double, dash, dotted. We can define our own, but we'll define our own next week, I think. I can't remember if our textbook shows it or not. I think our textbook might not show that. But at least we're starting out with some basic ones. The appendix has all the ones we'll regularly use until we start defining our own dashes and dots. And our textbook might cover that. Oh, and then spacing things out, we can add some padding. So while I'm down here, let's say padding, if we give it one number, 2.3 EMs, put that over here. Okay. Notice that percentage no longer applied. I had to fit that certain size, but one number does the same thing all the way around. We have padding left, padding right, padding top, padding bottom, or we can put in different combinations of numbers. We do 2 numbers, say 12 point and 23 pixels. You see we get one thing on the left and right side. It's kind of hard to tell left and right are the same there because of where word wrap fell. And then we get another thing on the top and bottom. For question in the chat room, get a different color for which thing? Different color on which thing? The border?
Yeah, like yellow, pink, purple.
Oh, you just use one of the different names or these color things we were talking about Monday and today. All those different color patterns. Where I type the word green, any of our color choosing ones can go in that spot. So like border is the size, the style, and then the color. And any of the color choosing ones we want would work. Just like any of our sizes ones. We can use percents, EMs, points, inches, centimeters. Lots and lots of ways to measure the different sizes. So the thing to remember is the border gets style. Oh wait, size, style, color. Goes in that order, and any way you have to pick a size or a color will work there. The style is a short list. We'll see that. We can control the dashes. We can make different size dashes, but that's the only one we really have much control over. Instead of doing all even dashes, we can do like short, long. Make a border that spells SOS in Morse code going around. And have control over how the dashes are. Otherwise, it's the size, the style, and the color. If we add 3 numbers to this, let me make this bigger. So I'll do points on all of them. 23 point, and then 8 point. We do 3 numbers. Because of the wrapping, we can't really see it. Left and right are the same, and top and bottom are different. The 8's on the bottom. It's kind of hard to tell there, but because of text writing wrapping, we can't really tell. Play around with different numbers, or the 4 numbers is probably one you might want to go with. 12 point, 23 point, 8 point, 50 point. I mean, it's really big. So you can see we get a different size as it goes around it. So that starts at the top and goes. No, top, bottom, left, right. Which again is inconsistent across different programming situations. So I had to think about it for a second, but you can also do a drastic example this time for it. So there's the margin heading, and then margins are outside of that. So margin left would move us away from that left edge. So 3.2 elements. And notice since it applied to that one, it's using that big font, not the little 12-point font above. But at 3.2 elements up here, we'd get something very different. Top and bottom margin, what's the thing about it? The section. So in the section, we had a bottom margin. Margin bottom. Oh, in the same 2, 3, or 4 number thing for the margins. Let's say 28 points, so a nice big margin under there. And notice it applies to that section, so it's based off. Well, 28 points is a precise measurement. I didn't use the scale. I was thinking I used AM for a second. But it put a 28-point measurement in between those 2. But what happens if I come back and put something smaller on the top of the one below? So right below that 28-point margin on the bottom, I can come down here and say margin top 12 point. Any guesses on what's going to happen? Is it going to get further away or stay the same? I guess it's a 50-50 guess. Both of them are reasonable guesses too. So anybody want to What do you think is going to happen? Yes. So they reload it, it doesn't change. So overflow is allowed. And the overflows make sense when you see them. I could sit here and read off a list, but it will make way more sense when you see what's allowed to overflow and what's not allowed to. Kind of like if we don't say the width, it just goes all the way across the page. That makes sense for a default width. The one above, the smaller one is, there's no need for that because we're already at least 12 away. But if I was to change that to say 52, then it does move. But the 28 doesn't apply because 52 overrides it. Overflows. Really, it's just it doesn't apply. Remember that top to bottom thing? We already set a 28-point margin there. So if our next margin is 12 point, it's not going to do anything. But if our next margin is 50 point, we'll see that move. So I always call it the overflowing on some rules. They make sense when you see them. We don't always have it, but it's there. And once you see it, it makes sense why that one overflows and another one didn't. And if nothing else, keep in mind that the rule that does something similar to the thing written above it in the file. That was a quick pass on those, margins, padding, border, and then that thing, the textbook has you type at the top in the global selector, the wildcard selector, where you put it, all your elements about the box model. I can't remember the word right now. I don't ever type it because I think my mind prefers to go the other way and the border not be included. I think of it like fence. A fence is not part of a yard. A fence is outside of the yard. But that's the way my mind works. That line at the top includes that in your measurements. So if you want to say like one element takes 50% of the page, the other element takes 50% of the page, but the margin is not included, but that border being included or not is going to go off 50%. If that makes sense, right? We only have 100%, so if we already declared 50%, but still have to squeeze something else in there, that could make a difference. But again, that's something that you'll want to see in action a couple times. But even when you're trying random practice and come across something that you really like, especially at this level, go ahead and change it a couple more times. Just make note of the version you really like so you can go back to that at the end, but change it a couple times to trying to develop a little bit of intuition for how the CSS is applying and affecting things and how it's happening. That way you have a better idea on what to do next time you design. Obviously that doesn't completely apply in the textbook because they have specific rules to follow. They give you everything, but please get some of your own practice too. Active subject we learn by doing. Does anybody have any questions about those? See head shaking no in here, so y'all probably ready. I'm guessing y'all are ready to do something or be finished with the class today. So the thing I couldn't get to on the notes or push back the key concepts, textual things. So the writing assignment, I think it's chapter 5. I have to go look in the book to double check. But whichever one has a writing assignment, not an HTML assignment, you can put that off till after we talk about it in class. And then that's just how we want to approach it. Key concepts, the core concepts of visual communication or core concepts of graphic design. Different ways we can say it, but the starting points on which all of our conceptual thinking about how things should look are built off of. The key concepts and how they affect people. Otherwise, that was it for today. An active subject we learn by doing. There's 25 minutes left on our scheduled time. I'll be sitting around waiting for questions to come in until then. That was a long lecture, but please make sure you're getting time to actively practice these things, not just the step-by-step in the book. Otherwise, y'all have a great weekend. If you have any questions, let me know. I will see you on Monday.